Good morning, friends. Welcome back to GM Philosophy in the Morning. I'm the GM Philosopher. Today we're talking about villains, more specifically, 5 ways to make D&D villains instantly better. Villains are at the very heart of what makes TTRPGs interesting, successful, and fun. And if you don't nail the villains, the game loses a lot of its magic. So today we're going to talk about 5 of my favorite ways to keep villains awesome, make villains that your players will love to hate. Let's dive in with tip number 1. Give them a human truth. Great villains aren't born evil. They are human first, or in D&D, humanoid first. Or you might even rephrase this to say, they are sentiently conscious first, right? Because we're sometimes dealing with maybe not even humanoid forms, dragons and beholders and the like. But the idea is, what core belief do they hold that your players might even agree with? An example could be a necromancer who believes death is unjust and fights to end it. An emotional layer to this could be that villains who echo our fears or ideals do tend to get under the skin because there's a lot of truth in what they're actually saying and fighting for. There's probably a point of convergence where the player characters and the villain agree. It's just that the villain usually takes it too far, and that's what makes them a villain. So make sure to give them this kind of like moral touch, this human touch, something the players can really relate to and even sympathize with. Tip number 2 is make their goal achievable. A villain with a realistic, attainable goal is way more terrifying than a villain who is trying to accomplish something that isn't really going to be possible or even believable. And here's the reason. When you see a villain with a realistic goal and they have plans leading to that goal, and the players realize, oh wow, there's actually a very good chance they're going to succeed. They're probably going to succeed. This actually makes it way more scary. For example, world domination versus reclaiming this piece of stolen land. These are 2 very different types of goals, and one of them is more like an endgame boss goal, and one of them is more like a mid-level game villain goal. But when you think about just how much easier it's going to be for the villain to reclaim the stolen land than it would be for them to achieve world domination, you realize that this kind of puts an element of the players really needing to race the clock to defeat this villain, because not only is the goal achievable, but it can be achieved in a much shorter time span. You also want to make sure that the goal fits with the villain's story and motivations, obviously, but this consistency and the drivenness of the villain, coupled with sort of that racing the clock idea and the fact that the goal is so attainable, can really place a sense of urgency under the players and make them think, oh wow, this is real, this is a real fight, we have to do something, we must do it now. That's going to lead us to tip number 3. Give them an emotional bond. Tie your villain emotionally to the party. Make them a mentor, a lover, a sibling, maybe even a former hero that these player characters could look up to, or maybe did look up to until they fell to the dark side or whatever. The idea here is that you can basically use this emotional bond to increase the dynamics of the relationship between the player characters and the villain. If they're just an evil, dark, shrouded creature who attacks them with an icy blade, well, that might be scary. But isn't it way more scary if this villain was once someone that they really loved, someone that they actually interacted with in game, maybe even someone that they don't really want to hurt? Maybe they're thinking, if we could just talk them out of this, right, that adds an extra layer of emotional complexity. You could also flip it around. Maybe this villain doesn't really want to hurt the party. Maybe they have a bit of a dilemma on their side. I don't really want to fight these heroes. These are people I've loved, people I've cared about. And the great thing about this type of dynamic is that if a fight does break out, there are more emotional consequences, right? Players will actually feel it versus just, the giant monster with huge teeth. Not that there isn't a place for that type of thing, but if you can find a way to emotionally tie them together, makes it way more metal, okay? Now, tip number 4 is actually maybe a little bit, I would say, a tip that probably most GMs have utilized. However, I do think that bringing it up is important, and that is, let them win small, especially in the beginning. If your villain never wins, they're not really a threat. they're not really going to be perceived as scary or intense by the player characters. And so letting them land some blows, letting them get some victories, letting them hit where it hurts and get away with it is actually kind of important. And I don't mean to give them like major plot armor. I just mean orchestrate it so that, their plans are actually good. They have what it takes to actually achieve some wins. Maybe while the player characters are out shopping, or they go to the next village over, or they're out on a quest, their lair gets raided by the villain and a beloved NPC gets mortally wounded, right? Giving the villain some wins in the short term, especially in the beginning, sets you up for a more climactic battle. It sets you up for a battle where the player characters really want it. They want revenge. They want justice. They want to make things right. So this is another way to kind of emotionally bring them together, but this is much more using the negative, the destruction, the evil, than the good or the attachment, right? You build up that resentment, that sense of ill faith that makes the villain suddenly become a primary target for the player characters. And that is a super fun way to make your villain more awesome. Now, quick before we go to tip number 5, which is maybe I think the most interesting and maybe the tip that people don't think about the most when it comes to making villains awesome. This is probably a technique that I have not seen used as intentionally. I want you to download our free 10-minute GM tips toolkit. This is basically an ebook I put together, my top 10 pieces of information that'll help you to level up your games literally overnight. 10-minute GM mastery toolkit. With a 10-minute read, you can take your sessions to the next level, and it's awesome, and it's free, so no reason not to grab it and see if there might be a tip or two to help you. So grab that, links in the description. This helps us to further our mission here at GM Philosophy of empowering game masters to run better games, which is at the core of what we do. Now, let's go on to tip number 5, final tip. Build a mirror. I don't literally mean a mirror, I mean a story mirror. Okay? The best villains reflect something back at the players, something they don't want to face. This could mean moral inversion, same goal but opposite method. And one of my favorite examples of this in all of cinema is Thanos. Now, obviously, those who read the comic books know that in the Marvel movies, Thanos had a much different goal than he originally did in the comic books. In the comic books, he was trying to impress Lady Death. But in the Marvel movies, it was kind of changed, and he had a somewhat noble cause of wanting to save the universe from basically populating so much that the resources couldn't sustain it, and then you have this mass suffering. His way of dealing with it, however, was to wipe out half of all living things. This would effectively double number of resources, and everyone would have a better time, basically. But there's a moral inversion here, because most good aligned people would say something like, well, let's create more resources instead using the same power. But the idea is that Thanos didn't really have that different of an end result goal than the Avengers. The Avengers wanted to also stop suffering, stop death, stop needless calamity, basically, which is what they saw Thanos as. It's just interesting how you have this villain and then the good guys, and actually their goals at some point are the same. It's just the methods and even the alignment and the decisions they make moving toward that goal is what separates them and makes them bitter mortal enemies. And if you can deploy this in your games, this actually also helps to build that emotional connection between your characters and the villain, but it also helps to put some moral gray area in, sprinkle it in. And one of the best things you could possibly do is try to make the villains reflect something back at the players to such an extent that maybe even 1 or 2 or 3 of your players are seriously wondering if maybe they should join the villain, or if it makes so much sense that you have a couple of people questioning, hold on, should we really be fighting this person, or should we be helping them? If you can get your players thinking like this is so powerful. And the way that you do that is by really thinking through your villain's motivations, really making it make sense, really making a cohesive villain plot arc where the intentions and the outcome really do make sense. So much so that your players will be very challenged to kind of pinpoint where it goes wrong and why the villain is wrong for going in that direction. You can make this so complicated, so gray mattery, that it can really mess with your players in the sense of forcing them to really think through the philosophy of why they're even trying to stop this villain. And if you can get them to do that, friend, you have already won, because you are already creating a game scenario where the players care so much that they're thinking through the morals and ethics and philosophies of the situation. And that is awesome. And I think that's part of the beauty of TTRPGs. All right, with that being said, I want to leave you with this final, basically, word. Your villain isn't just an obstacle, or at least they don't have to be. They can be a lens. You can use them to reveal what your players truly care about. And one of the very best things you can do is to just take a little extra time, a little extra care in crafting your villain, their motivations, where they fall in the alignment scale, and then basically just use these tips to help make them scarier, make them also more relatable, and then make them more emotionally evocative, and then also philosophically challenging. This will really give your players that extra punch in the villain experience. It will make your game that much more memorable. Thank you so much for coming back for another episode of GM Philosophy in the Morning. I'm the GM Philosopher. I'll see you awesome people on the next one.